So good morning, everybody. Please take your seat. Okay, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Tristano Bacchetti de Gregoris. I'm the coordinator of the Credible project, which is the project that from which this summit series was born. And this is why I have the privilege and the honor to open this summit. So first of all, allow me a bit of greetings, starting from the history. So first of all, it was the Mission Soil who about 3 years ago decided to fund this somehow small project called Credible. And so part within that project, we had this idea of using the summit as an opportunity to promote and build trust and momentum on credible carbon farming. And so my personal thanks is to the whole Credible Consortium, which was obviously has been key in building this summit series. We started small 3 years ago. This is our third edition, and we'll probably make it again in the coming years. So thanks for the whole consortium that I represent. Then, of course, it's Climate Kick, who is the main organizer of this event. So it's on their shoulder is all the logistic, and starting from Saskia, Keesstra, and Daniel Zimmer, but the whole team, Colomb, Seth, Dora, and also my people, Leandro and Yolanda, who have participated in organizing this. So my deep thanks and gratitude. Obviously, this year, this event is also co-hosted by Veneto Agricoltura, Conf Agricultura Veneto, and the EIT Food. We have spent many hours coordinating in the last few months. So it was fun, and it was interesting and experience and pleasure from my side. So I thank all this co-hosted organization. Also the sponsors, which contribute to make this possible: Mars, BASF, and Lila for Soils, another Mission Soil project about living lab for carbon farming. And importantly, obviously, the commission itself, our usual counterpart is the team led by Kirsten Dunlop, who is behind the building of the CRCF. But in the last few months, that collaboration has expanded, and we had plenty of meetings with also DG Agri and the JRC. And this is reflected by the presence here today of the Director Generals, Kurt Vanderberg, Director General for Climate Action, Elisabeth Werner, Director General for Agriculture and Rural Development, as well as Alessandro Sampieri, which is Director for Sustainable Resources at the JRC. Thank you for being here. And my last thank is to all of you, which you are the hero of this summit, because it's really thanks to you and your participation that this is possible. We have received 275 by memory contribution to this event. So thank you all for the participation. It was a lot of work, but it was enlightening, and I'm really thankful. So before I pass the floor to Saskia and the organization, let me just share with you a small reflection. It's my own reflection. We live in a time of polycrisis. The climate crisis is probably the one closest to this audience, but also the challenges faced by the rural communities, where aging population, land degradation and abandonment, and the general loss of hope are unfortunate trends in many territories, especially here in the south. In this context, carbon farming, and when I say carbon farming, I obviously mean farming, forestry, wetland management, and livestock management. Carbon farming comes as an opportunity to support the systemic transformation required to face these challenges. And here, in my opinion, is the differentiator. Climate outcome of farming practices cannot be seen just as a carbon credit, another commodity that can be sold in exchange for cash. Carbon farming should serve as a catalyst for deeper transformation of land management into integrated production models that deliver climate, environmental, and social benefits. However, figuring this out, how this deeper transformation could look like, is extremely complex because it involves many competencies, aligning the interests of different actors, and is often place-specific. So this complexity is the reason why this summit series, from the beginning, was designed as a dialogue, a moment of cross-fertilization to inspire smart and innovative solutions. And this is why it has such a format, in particular for the breakout sessions. Where contributors have been asked to collaborate, often with strangers, building together coherent logics for the sessions and concrete recommendations out of them. These learnings will be shared with the Commission that will be listening. And the Commission has had a central role in designing such an open innovation approach. I guess it would have been easier for everyone just come up here and present a case. But it is in the act of listening, trying to find common grounds, thinking outside of your realm of competencies, that we can innovate and really try to address these great challenges that we face. Ultimately, serving the purpose of this summit, which is to inspire the creation of coherent and impactful policies and transformational mechanisms. Or at least this was and is our hope, and is with the same hope that I now direct it to you, wishing a productive and hopefully enjoyable event. Thank you.
Okay, now it's my turn. Thank you so much for all coming here. We are very pleased to see so many people interested in exactly what Tristano just explained, to see carbon farming beyond what just the act of putting more carbon in the soil, but actually seeing it indeed as a catalyst, as a driver to create new opportunities for business, for farmers, for foresters. So yes, but now I would like to have the next slide. I cannot do this myself, or I can. Wait, let me see. Okay, no. The next one, please. Okay, well, so getting to know each other a little bit. So we created this Menti. So if you could please go there, either scan the QR code or use the code that is on the bottom. Just to see where you're all from and who you are. So if you can change to the Menti. In the control room. Can you change to the Menti, please? Yes. It's not working? Okay, maybe you can... Okay, it's working already 300, because One of the reasons why I want to do this too is not only because there is a lot of people, likely, because we don't know exactly how many there are, that are joining us online through streaming on YouTube. So please, the next slide. In the Menti. No, not the next slide, but in the Menti. Okay, so this is not the right Menti, I'm sorry. Okay, never forget, just to go out of it, because we don't have time for this. So my next item on the, what I wanted to know is which countries you were from and which stakeholder group you were from, so that just to see a little bit the statistics of where everybody is from. But then we have some welcoming words from the Minister of Agriculture from Italy, Francesco Lollobrigida, and we have a welcoming video that will be shown now.
Un saluto alle autorità, agli organizzatori e a tutti i presenti. Permettetemi un ringraziamento particolare a Confagricoltura Veneto e al presidente Gallarati Scolti Bonaldi per l'invito a questo importante appuntamento internazionale. Pur non potendo essere con voi in questo momento di persona, desidero farvi arrivare il mio messaggio di vicinanza e apprezzamento in una giornata così densa di significato. L'apertura dello European Carbon Farming Summit a Padova rappresenta un'occasione importante per confrontarci su alcune sfide che vedono l'Italia in prima linea. L'Italia custodisce una biodiversità straordinaria, un patrimonio che fa parte della nostra storia che oggi siamo chiamati a proteggere con un presidio attivo del territorio. Qualche folle in questi anni aveva messo in discussione il ruolo degli agricoltori, degli allevatori, dei pescatori, come fossero in contrasto con la protezione dell'ambiente. Grazie all'impegno, soprattutto del nostro governo, del mondo associazionistico, abbiamo invertito la rotta. E oggi anche nei palazzi distanti dai boschi, dalle terre e dal mare, si riesce a comprendere fino in fondo, di nuovo, che alla base dell'Unione Europea c'è l'agricoltura e l'agricoltore è il primo custode del territorio. Ecco, la PAC l'abbiamo sostenuta per questo e abbiamo ottenuto 10 miliardi in più di quanto la Commissione proponeva per l'Italia, perché l'Italia non intende rinunciare ai suoi agricoltori. Oggi il nostro governo è quello che ha investito di più nella storia della Repubblica, oltre 15 miliardi sul settore primario. Siamo diventati la prima agricoltura per valore aggiunto in Europa, superando colossi come la Francia, la Germania, la Spagna. Abbiamo ottenuto un risultato importantissimo che ci ha reso orgogliosi ma anche consapevoli di quanto vale. La candidatura della nostra cucina a patrimonio dell'UNESCO è diventato un fatto. L'intera umanità ha preso atto che c'è bisogno di proteggere il sistema Italia. Dobbiamo essere capaci però anche di sviluppare un'agricoltura moderna e innovativa, capace di utilizzare la ricerca per risolvere alcune criticità. Vedete, nel tempo si è proceduto a immaginare che con regole e burocrazia si potesse avere un ambiente migliore, però si impattava sulla produzione, lasciando inalterati i consumi e spesso avvantaggiando paesi terzi che non rispettavano le stesse nostre regole e che entravano nei nostri mercati in competizione sui prezzi con i nostri produttori. Beh, se tu vuoi ridurre, per esempio, gli agrofarmaci, trovi in noi chi condivide questo tipo di lavoro, se esistono delle alternative fruibili, economicamente accessibili. E questo in molti casi non è stato. Dall'altra parte dobbiamo immaginare aziende agricole multifunzionali, capaci di produrre energia, riducendo i costi e anche aumentando il reddito, capaci di offrire i propri prodotti verso l'esterno, capaci di utilizzare altre potenzialità e i crediti di carbonio sono uno di questi. E anche lì l'Italia è all'avanguardia per riuscire a garantire la giusta funzionalità di questo elemento all'interno dell'economia e il registro dei crediti di carbonio sarà un risultato oggettivo che metterà in condizione molte aziende di curare l'ambiente garantendo quella sostenibilità che non può prescindere dalla sostenibilità economica che significa lavoro e ricchezza. Continuiamo così, abbiamo intrapreso la strada giusta invertendo la rotta di una nave che aveva grandi marinai, le nostre imprese, che aveva grandi potenzialità ma che probabilmente mancava di chi avesse un timone e potesse tracciare la rotta. Governo significa questo in termini etimologici e questo è tornato ad essere il governo guidato da Giorgia Meloni. Grazie per quello che avete fatto e per quello che ancora faremo insieme.
Ok. Unfortunately, he will not hear that, but nonetheless, thanks to Francesco Lollobrigida. Our next welcome is from the Veneto region. It's Federico Caner. He is the director of Venete Agricoltura. So please.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning at the President of Confagricoltura, Gian Santi, and the Regional President, Bonaldi Gallerati Scotti. And thank you for the invitation to this launch event for the 3rd European Carbon Farming Summit 2026. Veneto Agricoltura has provided strong organizational support for this summit alongside EIT Food and Confagricoltura Veneto. Veneto Agricoltura, in its pilot farm, has been implementing full-scale long-term experiments to define the best solution to restore adequate levels of organic matter in the soil since many years ago. This is to ensure that agriculture maintains its production potential and its capacity to give farmers a sufficient income, at the same time supplying a significant continuous absorption of CO2 in the cultivated land with the general benefit. I wish you all a productive and successful 3 days filled with valuable insights and stimulating presentation. Thank you very much and good job.
Okay, thank you so much for this warm welcome. And then now we have finalized the welcoming words from all directions, and I would like to give the floor to Kirsten Dunlop. She is the CEO of Climate Kick, and since 2017 she started at EIT Climate Kick that now has evolved into Climate Kick Foundation. She's leading the organization with a deep conviction in our capacity to learn and evolve into a climate-resilient society. She brings 30 years of experience catalyzing systemic transformations in a career that spanned academia, consultancy, banking, and insurance. Kirsten also serves on a variety of advisory boards and is a recognized leader at the European Commission Economic and Societal Impact of Research and Innovation Experts Group. So in addition to that, she is also my boss, and I'm very happy that she's here. And she will give us an inspirational talk to see which way we should go with carbon farming. Have the floor.
Hello, everybody. Good morning. What an extraordinary and wonderful box in which to sit. I am going to experiment with how to get these to move with a clicker. Let's see. So I'm going to be dancing around next to this thing to see if I can get this to move. But let me start by introducing maybe just a little bit of a map of the territory that I propose to cover as a way of kicking off this 3rd European Carbon Farming Summit. I have chosen to take a moment to go through some of the dimensions of what it is that we face. Not because I am assuming you don't know them, but because sometimes seeing multiple dimensions together matters. And particularly it matters to set us up for thinking about what is the design challenge that we have ahead of us. The second thing I'm going to do is talk about some of the responses, the structural ways in which we could respond to the challenge we're facing. And the third, I'm going to come to this summit and what it is that we are here to do, particularly informed by what has built from the first and the second summits to now. So let me see if I can get this to go forward. Are you able to exit that and help me actually move these slides, because I will need to do those? Yes, okay. All right, so as I said, I'm going to start by just reminding us of where we stand and think of this as a way of taking on a sense of, as I said, the design challenge. Europe is the fastest warming continent, and as of last year, we formally, officially transgressed the famous 1.5 degrees threshold of overall global warming. The last 3 years, including last year, have been amongst the warmest in the history of recorded temperatures. So where we are, please remember the shape of this diagram, is here. We are out of our carbon, what is called our carbon budget. We are at a point where we have very, very, very little room to move and very little available resources to continue to use in the way in which we're using them. And what really matters is the shape of the change, the shape of that curve of change that we need to get ourselves to a working and safe or relatively safe environment. As it currently stands, we are on track for 2 degrees by about 2040. And given what has just happened in the last 24 months, back on track in Europe for 4 degrees by the end of the century. That's unlivable. That's not just numbers that we're playing around with. And what I thought I might do is just help us think and unpack that in terms of its consequences and some of the things that we need to know as practitioners thinking about livelihoods in a world tracking forward like that. The first thing, can I take this forward? No? No, okay. The first thing is to remember, as we know, it is not only about emissions. The planetary boundaries, this is coming from the work that now Johan Rockström is doing on creating a planetary health check, which gives us finally a full, almost operating roadmap for what is happening around the planet. And note the elements in which food systems contribute. 30% of emissions come from the food system. 5 planetary boundaries are breached because of food systems, and 15 million deaths per year could be averted if we shift to more planetary, to a balanced planetary health diet. Now, this is coming from the Eat Lancet report launched last year. But the planetary boundaries and the transgression of multiple other factors begin to really matter. Why do they matter? Because so often we have continued to assume that we have time. That famous carbon budget is somehow extensible. And a large part of what we've been doing has relied on the fact that the land itself and oceans are absorbing excess carbon. So in other words, we have a masses compensatory element. The warning that we have now and the world that we're facing into is that that sink effect, the natural sink effect of the planet, is beginning to break down. And the information about the fact that the oceans begin to stop absorbing carbon is absolutely critical, because the minute at which that carbon sink, that absorption of our excess emissions begins to really break down, you have what is called hothouse Earth and an accelerated exponential effect of warming. That is why now, seriously, as of last year, a lot of the modeling that has been done on what are called Earth systems tipping points is beginning to really step up. In particular for Europe, looking at the implications of the North Atlantic Meridional Oscillation, the AMOC. Last year in Exeter, I sat through 3 days of listening to what is coming now that it is possible to integrate the modeling on not just carbon emissions and global overarching warming, but the relationship and the interaction with land use degradation. And one of the implications of that, for example, coming back to this question of the land as the means by which we absorb emissions, we thought that the Amazon, one of the biggest carbon sinks on the planet, may tip over from being a carbon sink to a carbon source by 2070. Now that we're able to model the existing land use degradation in the Brazilian Amazon already, it looks like the Amazon tips by 2035. Think about the timing of that in our lifetimes, because that changes atmospheric rivers that give water elsewhere always across the globe. It changes so many other factors. which is why you now have governments organizing national security and emergency briefings, beginning to look at the integrated effects of what this kind of Earth system's exponential change would mean, and what it would mean from a security perspective if you are in the northern hemisphere, in Europe. If the AMOC tips, and actually this colder winter suggests that that's one of its effects, that's permanent sea ice through the south of the Netherlands and halfway over the middle of Germany. It's a very, very different world. And a lot of our assumptions tend to be very linear. This is just about a planet getting hotter. That is not how Earth systems work. So if I come to this diagram, which is a copy of something that UN prepared years ago as the backup plan for what happens when we get to 4 degrees. Now, this doesn't take into consideration, actually, the AMOC. So this is assuming simply planetary warming. The green areas are areas of arable land, where food production is still possible. The yellow and the brown areas are uninhabitable. The yellow areas are dedicated to an integrated energy array. The UN's assumption when it came up with this is that the green areas would have to be ring-fenced into a global food commons in order to allow humans to survive. Look at where those areas are and think about what is going on in those territories right now, because that will be one of our challenges. So let me deepen this towards food and water specifically, because there are many things you can talk about. Sea level rise, the Greenland ice sheet, which is no longer really fully freezing, so it's beginning now to go. That's 6 meters of sea level rise. That's the loss of at least one major staple crop, rice, in Vietnam and Indonesia. Think about the implications around what comes closer to home for a summit on carbon farming and climate finance for agriculture. The World Bank is projected by the 2030, same thing, we're talking about years that are horribly close. Global freshwater demand will exceed what we have available by 40%. That's a very big number. We have begun to realize that there are chain reaction events of food systems failure, of simultaneous breadbasket failure, which is something we're really going to think about, because we have also begun to be able to integrate longitudinal research on the effects of malnutrition. The work that Jacqueline McLeod did, looking at longitudinal malnutrition in the sub-Saharan Africa, and correlating that and examining, she was running a correlation afterwards, what she was looking at was the relationship between malnutrition and the formation of the human brain. And what she discovered was if children are severely malnourished between the ages of 0 to 12, they do not grow the hippocampus, the little part of the brain that connects our 2 organs, the 2 parts, the hemispheres of the brain, and that are responsible for our affiliative response. Our capacity as a species to realize that we are stronger together, to reach out, team up, and collaborate. Which is when she started to go back and correlate the years of the so-called African uprisings that are touted as democratic uprisings, young guys running around in jeeps with submachine guns, and begin to match. Okay, actually this matches. These are the children that grew up in years of sustained malnutrition. Their response with jeeps and submachine guns may not be democratic uprising. It may be that that is the only hardware that they have to engage or to respond to crisis and uncertainty. Now, if we think about the implications of multiple breadbasket failure, we need to think about the fact that we may be producing our own species, producing humans, who are not able to respond with the humanity's standard, extraordinary survival skill of teaming up together and forming affiliative tribes. That means we might really need to invest in nutrition as the fundamental investment to enable us to get through and stabilize what it is that we face. The second thing that we're beginning to realize is that photosynthesis doesn't magically improve with higher levels of parts per million carbon dioxide. What happens is that plants behave similar to the human body. They store higher and higher sugars and convert them, which means, in effect, our plants become like junk food under higher degrees of emissions and warming. that also has a significant effect on healthcare costs, obesity, diabetes, cardiac concerns. So we're looking at a situation where the implications of what we are facing has extraordinary economic costs, has extraordinary health costs, has a degree of destabilizing factors that we have not yet fully really got our heads around, and begins to be modeled in terms of its economic implications as orders of magnitude that none of us in our lifetimes have ever really appreciated. It is not an easy situation to look forward into. It has a few other growing, sleeping concerns, and one of them is this. Increasingly, as you start to realize, as the financial system starts to realize the economic costs and implications of what it is that we are facing, insurance starts to pull out. And particularly because of this one particular issue, the question of insurability, the relationship between the affordability of underwriting risks and the extremity and predictability of the events that insurance needs to cover. Simply what happens is that insurance becomes no longer viable. It's not that you can't underwrite, but no one can afford it. I come from Australia. If you try to insure your house north of Tweed Heads, it can cost you between 250 and 300,000 Australian dollars a year, which means very few people insure unless there's a government subsidy, because it is just too risky. There are too many correlated climate change effects. The problem is that if insurance comes out of our economies, all of the rest of the financial stack comes up with it. If property is not insured, it's hard to get a credit, a loan, mortgages, the whole financial system begins to come down. So this is something we need to really start to understand, because we are looking at a series of combinations of financial system risks, political system risks, basic human emotive response, nutrition, collective agency, socio-psychological systems. In other words, what we're looking at is a situation where some of our adaptation options become less and less feasible, and we start to go towards what is called derailment risk, a series of chain reactions like domino effects, really starting to knock on to the point at which we are in a very, very difficult and destabilizing future. And I don't think it is a coincidence that we are now starting to see what some are calling Chapter 3 of World War III. Many, in fact, I'm involved in a group at the moment involved in security globally, and principally the conversation I discovered stepping into that group is that they are already naming World War III, simply naming the fact that it has arrived in ways in which most of us who lived through or learned history about the ways in which wars manifest at a global scale were not expecting. Distributed, decentralized, and gradually cumulative, not unlike exactly what is happening here. So, I'm setting that scene with a number of random facts coming from the fact that I work for an organization that has the opportunity to work across many fronts and many elements, from food systems and natural systems, health systems, policy systems, complex modeling, and so on, in order to ask this question and relate it to where we are and what we are here to talk about in these 3 days. Because our relationship with natural resources to steer out of a default future of a chain reaction of events that affect our health, our capacity to team up, our economies, our politics, and the underlying stability of the worlds that we have grown up with, really very critically depends on our relationship with natural resources. Never waste a good crisis. Especially if you can really think about how does that help us sharpen our sense of what it is that we're doing. Europe has a problem in this sense. Europe's carbon sink is not improving, it is degrading and failing. For a number of reasons. If you are in doubt about some of the elements of that, read last year's State of the Environment report from the European Environment Agency. If you go deep into the data, it sounds polished and reasonable, but the data is disastrous. So that brings me back to this curve, the shape of the change that we need to design for. to face into the future that we're facing into, to think about the design of land use, of land values, of the way in which we farm, the way in which we value and finance land use and agricultural activity, we need to design for a series of factors, interventions, philosophies, and policies that are able to respond to what we're facing with that kind of order of speed and scale of change. And that's not easy, because the way we've been doing this until now has been much more deliberate, slow, steady, and incremental. In fact, the question I would ask is, are you designing for that in every single decision, in policy, in farming practices, in agriculture, in partnerships, because that's what we need. It means we're dealing with a world of radical uncertainty. Not only the world out there, of wars, of tension, of security, of geopolitical competition, of the craziness of what we're dealing with at the moment, but just that degree of change creates a degree of radical uncertainty. And so these are some of the reflections that we have learned about what are ways in which we might address that kind of uncertainty. One of them is to think about what Gregory Bateson advised. Gregory Bateson is the person who was responsible for much of the early thinking on cybernetics, a deeply ecological way of understanding humans, digital technology, and the world in which we are. And one of the things that Gregory Bateson advocated for all aspects of policy, innovation, development, and financing was to think about a budget of possibilities. Never assume that there is one answer that will solve for this order of complexity, but to always create the option space, the learning space of considering multiple possibilities, and to do so from a principle of ecological thinking. Which leads me to reminding us that one of the things we need to be thinking about as we design policy, as we design finance, and indeed as we design the way in which we work with ecosystem services, is to learn much faster than we have done hitherto from nature, or to relearn, depending on your perspective, on the importance of traditional knowledges and practices and indigenous wisdom. But to begin to really ingest, including into our policies, biomimetics, biomimicry, the mapping of ecosystem services, something like what Janine Benyas is doing with major industrial complexes in the US. We have, in some instances, experimented with thinking about that, thinking about policy, European policy, for example, in terms of acupuncture points or pressure points. Saskia introduced something that I have been involved with for several years now, actually thanks to Kurt Vandenberg, who's here, which is the ESIA group. And one of the last papers that came out of that thinking was to ask ourselves, how would we achieve exponential effects of change? Because that's what this curve is about, exponential change. How would you trigger the European policy system to achieve the kind of chain reactions to get to, in a policy environment, this is not moving anymore. Yep, something equivalent to Earth system's tipping points with human system positive tipping points. Really what that means is it's referring to feedback loops. Do our feedback loops, in the way in which incentives, sanctions, capability building, financing, actually feed in a self-reinforcing exponential way, or do our policies act in disjointed, fragmented, tessellate ways that means we never quite get the dynamic of change towards positive uplifts? Because this is what we need to design for. And in Malaysia this year, there will be the next Tipping Points conference focused very much on how do we trigger and design for and nurture positive tipping points for change in human policies, politics, and economies, so that we survive better than we're doing now. And this is perhaps one example of what that looks like. This is a farm in Australia. It's just near Adelaide. It was created by a German entrepreneur who bought a completely arid area of land just near the sea and has transformed it into something that creates this kind of feedback loops. He put huge pipes down from the seabed, bringing cold, freezing cold ocean water up and run those pipes across the land. He put polyurethane tents over the top of the pipes. The condensation from the water creates water for tomatoes. He has a 10-year offtake agreement with Australia's largest supermarket for hydroponic tomatoes. When seawater condenses, it leaves deposits of minerals that are used for cosmetics and for fertilizer. The pipes down to the ocean floor are used to anchor kelp so that he can produce biofuels. And the kelp is anchored with fish boxes designed only to capture male fish at the bottom of the system so that he can create an entire aquaculture system. And he has combined that with wind and solar panels. He has 9 uncorrelated cash flows. And the value of that land is a multiple of 500. That kind of innovative thinking, designing for feedback loops, designing for exponential change, designing for change that really shifts the underlying economics of our system is what we need, and it's what we are here to start exploring. But that does mean we need to name what might be the huge drag on anything we seek to do, which is the way in which the existing economic system is working, the way in which it incentivizes extractive growth. If you think about currently the financing mechanisms around regenerative agriculture and carbon farming and credits, farmers are priced as if they are doing something reckless when regenerative agriculture is being priced. Whereas sticking with depleted soils and fragile monocultures in the kind of world I'm describing is far more reckless. So we need to start thinking about new value systems, new mythologies. This is not about policy. This is about mythology. This is about teaching ourselves what it is that we are, who we are, what we aspire to, what a good life looks like, and really start to understand what are the core structures that we shift. One of them is ownership. $352 trillion are locked up in what is called freehold, the right to do something with land with no one to stop you for generations. Alternative models like Fairhold allow for very long-term leases to introduce a partnership where a long-term landholder can require stewardship and provide access to land over time. These are models that are beginning to come back into the world because we are beginning to ask, how do we unleash what we know is needed? We need a shift in the way in which we think about education and skills and jobs. If I look at the world from the perspective of what Climate Kick is dealing with, we are addressing change across so many fronts, cities, regions, farming communities, and over, we get to a key sticking point that we continuously underestimate. We don't have the skills. We don't have people trained, ready, able to do the work that we need. Very often we've sold ourselves a set of aspirations around an education that is completely not fit for purpose for the world that we need. And I remember one of the people that I learned from years ago is a man called Leif Edvinsson, used to be the head of intellectual capital for Skandia. Leif Edvinsson was experimenting with economics in the 1990s, the economics of change. He ran the numbers on the fact that most companies spend a very significant, and governments actually, a very significant amount of their budgets on trying to take transformation programs through. And he modeled up a Boston matrix, a horizontal and a vertical axis, and said if you plot risk appetite and age on these axes, you get a perfect smile curve. People in their 20s and people in their 60s and 70s have no problem changing the world. Very high risk appetite. The problem is the people who are running the companies, who are taking decisions about policy and finance, are right at the bottom of that smile curve. They're in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. They've got mortgages to pay, school fees, divorce fees. They do not want to change the world. And so his hypothesis was it would cost you less as governments and as companies if you paid for people in their 30s to 50s to take a 10-year sabbatical, go to the Andes, buy a Harley Davidson, do what you like, and in those decision-making jobs, hire job shares between the 20-somethings and the 60 and 70-somethings. Now, I was working for Generali at the time. I raced off to the board and said, okay, I've got an answer for what we're going to do to solve the fact that we are just not getting transformation to happen. And it didn't work, but Leif Edvinsson went on to work with the government of Singapore, which is worth remembering. So let me come to where we are now, to this summit and what we're here to do for these 3 days. Because what I wanted to do is give a little bit of a, this matters. It doesn't just matter because you've heard a number like 1.5 or 2 degrees. It matters because we are facing something genuinely catastrophic in our lifetimes. There are things that we can do about that, but they are things that require us to shift paradigms, really shift the structures of our thinking, our core mythologies, our willingness to act. And the reality of what this summit is about is working that orange box in the middle. How on earth do we shift systems, practices, behaviors, norms in that very, very difficult implementation gap between the commitments that Europe has established in policy and the reality of where things are, where a nice, neat regulatory logic meets the reality of what it means to farm on the ground. Our task in these 3 days is to demonstrate that this transition to regenerative land use is not a burden, nor is it a problem for European competitiveness, but far from it, it's the foundation of the combination of security, competitiveness, and rural livelihoods. And you will hear about one of the authors of this report, which was financed by the EIB last year, done in partnership with Howden Group, which points out that European food and agri-systems are 60% at risk, looking forward in the next couple of decades, and are 70 to 85% uninsured, if I come back to the problem of uninsurance. So there's a job to be done to start to change the paradigm of what we're doing here. Think about it, or think about Europe's challenge in doing that, like a Rubik's Cube. And at the moment, that Rubik's Cube, if I think about what would have been the name of the 3 sides in 2019, they are quite different to what I would say are the name of the 3 sides now in 2026. Security, resilience, and the challenge of prosperity in the type of context that we're dealing with. But if you think about how a Rubik's Cube works, every single side cannot be moved in isolation. Every move affects every other side. We need to work out and think about how do we solve for regenerative land use, for shifts in our practices and our financing mechanisms with an integrated approach that understands that whatever we are doing with social capital, political capital, economic capital, depends on natural capital and the way in which we shift the whole system of levers together. What we have learned and what we're bringing into these 3 days is some very critical insights which are helpfully framed around the notion of almost polarities. Carbon credits are useful, but they do not provide sufficient value yet because they are offset against MRV costs that are prohibitive for smallholder farmers, smaller farmers. Think about the Rubik's Cube. We need to redesign core economics so that we get that balance, that integration of effects to work, those positive feedbacks to work. Smallest farms, which is actually the format that we really need for higher resilience, face some of the highest costs. There are solutions, and Europe has many of them available, like through Earth observation or group certification, but we need to think about how to tap into them. Carbon is critical, but it cannot be thought of as the end game. And I will come back to that because it's probably the most important shift that we need in these 3 days, accompanied by the second one. Most of us here represent, in some ways, either research, academia, or the supply side of this problem. Very few people yet here are really from the demand side of this problem. And the demand side really finds it hard to deal with such a patchwork landscape, which means we need to build with trust, and that is at odds with the kind of situation that I was describing. So, what we are here to do is unpack, work all of the angles to understand and build a world, a design for change that has that very steep curve where carbon farming becomes one of the connective instruments through which we think about how to harness the power of regenerative land use to keep absorbing carbon, to keep us healthy, and to shift our societies. And that means we need to go hard after the financial system, because we have a financial system that is reasonably good at financing assets. It is not good at financing outcomes, and it is disastrous at financing transition risk, particularly transition risk in ways that are affordable. So what that means is that we have a very, very challenging situation which requires us to change our relationship with financial architecture. What we know from what we were seeing last year and what we continue to build towards is a financing architecture that looks something like this. But of course, it's non-trivial. So that's very much the point of these 3 days. We know that we need portfolios, farms, practices that are designed to deliver measurable outcomes, that are working with that budget of possibilities that Gregory Bateson was describing, that have multiple interlocking capacities, looking at biodiversity and carbon certification as complementary, not opposing, thinking about integrated approaches to landscape and to land enterprise networks, like is beginning to happen in the UK, that are much more powerful structurally. Landscape and an integrated landscape approach is significantly more powerful than individual bilateral transactions. We need to shift the reward direction, the reward focus from assets, we finance priceable land, to outcomes. We finance, we invest in regenerative land use, regenerative livelihoods. That shift of norms, expectations, practices, incentives, is the kind of feedback shifts that we need that gets us to that exponential change, gets us to positive tipping point. And we cannot assume that farmers can transition on one payment source. We need a whole capital stack. And that is why insurance matters, banking matters, the way in which we think about credits, the way in which we understand the whole bedding of the CRCF in the full financial system. So ultimately, I come back to this core finding from last year's summit. We need to shift also a tempting but dangerous language around carbon farming as a metric, as a goal in its own right, and get it out of the language of that dominant economic system that deals in commodities, that looks for extraction, that tries to keep the cost as low as possible, that forgives waste and obsolescence. We really need to think about how we create carbon as a proxy for the regenerative capacity of land. And that leads us to really thinking about what is an integrated European view on land. And I'm reminding us of the flip side, because so often doing the work that we are doing with farmers, farming communities all over Europe, we are walking this incredibly fine line between doing something positive and sustaining and toggling always into the risk of simple factors, human factors, financial, physical, mental exhaustion. Feeding the polarization dynamics, the disinformation, the narratives that are encouraging people to feel that they are victims of a system of change, and continuing to invest in fragmentation. So when I'm saying here that the alternative requires orchestration, think of this summit, these communities, this series of communities of practice as one of the most powerful vehicles for orchestration in Europe at the moment, and one that we really need to use in those terms. And remember that the things that we are solving for is not knowledge, even though so often it's framed up in those terms. It's fair pricing, it's genuine risk sharing, it's long-term certainty. If you are doing a long-term regenerative transition in soils and land use, you're talking about a 10-year partnership with land. Financing needs to accompany that and be designed for that. So, I will come to just a last few reflections to think about or take as inspirations into the questions and the discussions and the community structures today. We have a choice, red pill, blue pill. Which world do we want to inherit? Which world do we want to give to our children? Which world do we want to live with? Every single day we wake up, we make this choice. We can think about the way in which we understand land as a compounding asset in the broadest possible sense, or we can think of it as a liability and keep working with it in those terms. For those of you who went to Belém last year, this was one of the installations at COP, and it was a nice reminder because it memes so much of what you see in media. Too late, too hard, too risky, too expensive, or the greatest opportunity of our lifetimes. So we know what we go into these 3 days with, an understanding that we have technology, an understanding that farmers who are using different practices, oldest practices, newest practices, technology, are proving that it works, a knowledge that the political architecture is shifting, and that there is a much, much deeper current running here on integrated landscapes. What we need to do is work out how to get that into this order and speed of change, of acceleration, and of exponential dynamics for change. And there are two things that I would leave us with that, in our experience, make a massive difference. And they have nothing to do with science technology, they have everything to do with human technology, which is why I am so worried about what we learn about long-term malnutrition. One is learning to power up what we do with one another through deep radical collaboration, and the other is the power of narrative. The stories that tell us what we aspire to do, what it means to farm, what it means to live well, what it means to live in what Europe's land use vision is. Now, we are in Italy, and just a little bit of a way down this extraordinary continent, there is a room which was painted at the center of the civic hall, the Palazzo Pubblico in Siena, which is the room where the decision makers of Siena sat to deliberate on choices and decisions brought to them by the community of Siena. That room is completely painted out with a picture of exactly this choice, the choice of what it means to govern from the perspective of common good and the interests of long-term stability. This is what is the effect in the cities in terms of mechanical arts, and this is the effect of the country, peaceful, prosperous, diverse, sustaining life right across the board. Right behind the decision makers, so equivalently here, and their chairs are there, is this allegory of what it takes to achieve those effects of prosperity, of stability, of regenerative life and balance. And it is all about common good. There's a rope there that goes from justice, that is twined, that is carried by every single citizen, goes up to the city of Siena. It is all about putting the interests of the collective, of the collaboration with others, above the interests of the individual. And on the other wall, you have a picture of what goes wrong if you don't do that. So, if we are thinking about the stories that we need now to help us save the world, there is one that is common to all of us. We only have one home. It is this, our common home. We have an opportunity and a responsibility to have the courage to lift up from the technocratic debates and divisions and really design for one common home, keeping us all safe. And in that common home, land is the fountain of energy, the substrate of absolutely everything. So when we design for stewardship of land, we are designing for stewardship of life itself, and we need to take that as seriously as this moment and this time calls for. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kirsten. It was really, truly inspireful. And one thing that just before we continue with our first panel, I would like to ask the people that are standing to find a seat. There are still a lot of seats here in the front in between other people. This is for security, and so just there is plenty of also much more comfortable for all of you. So now we are going to continue with the first plenary session on carbon farming for climate mitigation, biodiversity, and sustainable agriculture, culture, and forestry, which I organized together with EIT Food, with Sonia Petosi. This is really, the introduction of Kirsten was perfect for this, for our plenary session now, as it is really about sitting in between the policy that we have, that is there and is being designed and implemented, and the other side, which is the implementation, the people that really need to do and execute this. So we have 4 panelists. We have Kurt van der Berge from DG Klima. We have Elisabeth Werner from DG Agri, Massimiliano Giansanti from Confa Agricultura and Copa, and we have Remy Rocca from Mars. So I would like to first ask Kurt van der Berge, who is the Director General of Climate Action at the European Commission since January 2023, and before that he was working there, he acted as the Green Deal and Health Advisor to President Ursula von der Leyen and was Director for Policy and Programming of DG Research and Innovation. And in addition to that, also the acting Director for Research and Innovation Outreach. So please, Kurt, have the floor and give us a few of your insights on how this topic relates to the work that you do.
Thank you very much, Saskia. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and friends, dear partners in transition. It's really a pleasure to be here together with my dear friend and colleague Elisabeth Werner at the opening of the 3rd Carbon Farming Summit in Padova. Padova that has the oldest university after the one in Bologna. Padova that is in a region that is known for its farming excellence and that also has delicious food, as we appreciated last night. We're here on a day when in Brussels, our 27 ministers are adopting council conclusions, which is the jargon in the institutional framework, council conclusions on the European bioeconomy. Which is exactly what we will be discussing at this 3rd Carbon Farming Summit. So what better place and day to come together to reflect and debate how we reinvent ourselves and our economy in Europe without abandoning our values, our tradition and our strengths. And we do this in a context of rapidly changing climate, as Kirsten has very eloquently showed us, but also changing geopolitics and changing geoeconomics. It looks as if the whole world is getting crazy, but it doesn't mean that we need to get crazy. I think we need to stay the course on our agenda, which includes an agenda of building climate neutrality and climate resilience. And that's existential for Europe, not only because of ecological reasons, but also, and maybe even more today, because of economic and competitiveness reasons, geopolitical security and prosperity. We really have to understand our decarbonization journey as a journey to get fossil fuels out of our system and to modernize our economy and society so that it is fit for a future that will be very different from what we have experienced over the last few decades. And in that modern, defossilized economy, there is, of course, a growing role and importance for the bioeconomy. The bioeconomy that should supply food, biomass, and also biogenic carbon. But a bioeconomy that should also help make our agri-food system more resilient against the effects of climate change, which again, Kirsten very eloquently outlined. And we see a big opportunity in there, transforming the challenge into an opportunity by really looking at the business case of the bioeconomy. We gather at this summit today to explore how we can create a sustainable, long-term business opportunity for land managers, for farmers, for foresters, and every market actor across the bioeconomy value chain. We see it in the Commission, in DG Klima, with our colleagues in various Commission departments. We see it as our task as policy entrepreneurs to create enabling conditions for a market-based approach to the bioeconomy, bringing together supply and demand. That's how a market works, and that's how we have to transform and create the markets of the future. And like Tristano and Saskia and Kirsten said, we see carbon farming as a driver or a tipping point for growing the bioeconomy of the future. That requires, at this stage, we believe, three very important elements for creating this functioning and robust voluntary carbon farming market. One is credible certification. The other one is accessible and affordable monitoring, reporting, and verification. And thirdly, and of course, very importantly, a strong and predictable demand. Let me briefly touch on all three elements. Credible certification. We consider the carbon removal and carbon farming regulation as a foundation for results-based incentives for farmers and for foresters. And at the Commission, we're not sitting still on that. We already put in place the rules for a credible certification process. We will soon launch a process to recognize certification schemes, and we are finalizing the carbon farming methodologies for agriculture and agroforestry on mineral soils, as well as afforestation and rewetting and restoration of peatlands. We are currently assessing whether to expand the scope of carbon farming to emission reductions from livestock farming as well, with a focus on enteric fermentation and manure management. As you see, colleagues, dear friends, we are making everything ready to start implementing the carbon farming certification system this year and next. And I really would like to call on everyone, land managers, project developers, providers of MRV solutions and certification schemes to engage and make the CRCF a successful catalyst for this EU bioeconomy that we need so much in the future. The second element is accessible and affordable MRV for land. Clearly, there is an opportunity to improve MRV for land, and we are working in very close partnership with the Joint Research Centre, who is represented here as well, and the European Environment Agency, using their scientific input and know-how to facilitate the tracking of emission reductions and carbon removals in national and corporate GHG inventories, and to develop comprehensive and harmonized MRV for land. We have the strong aim and ambition to simplify the participation of farmers and foresters in the voluntary carbon farming market. As outlined in the bioeconomy strategy that the Commission published recently, and which is validated politically by the 27 member states today, we will establish an EU carbon farming database of models, emission factors, remote sensing products, and benchmarking data sets. And we believe this will reduce monitoring and administrative costs. And thirdly, and very importantly, and also an important reason why we gathered today at this Carbon Farming Summit, what we need is strong and predictable demand. At DG Clima, we are interested in creating a robust voluntary carbon market for various reasons. One, of course, being that it can support climate action across the EU bioeconomy value chain in reducing emissions, enhancing removals, and strengthening the resilience of our land and forests. And as outlined again in the bioeconomy strategy, in order to create predictable demand for result-based schemes and to stimulate private investment, and we have important private investors in this room, we at the Commission aim to establish an EU Buyers Club. This voluntary initiative will be designed to provide a clear demand signal and impetus for carbon farming under the CRCF regulation. I trust that this summit can be a catalyst, and we've heard the word catalyst several times, but that's really what it is about, that this summit can be a catalyst for collaboration and partnership to bring climate solutions to fruition. Thank you for joining us in this journey, and I look forward to the panel discussion.
Thank you, Kurt. It set the scene already nicely from the Klima point of view. So now I would like to ask Elisabeth Werner, who is the Director General of Agriculture and Rural Development at the European Commission since last year, May. She has 30 years of experience within the European Commission and brings a strong combination of institutional knowledge, budgetary expertise, and coordination skills across a wide range of policy areas. And therefore, I would like to give you the floor to give your perspective on the topic that is at hand and how the DG Agri aims to work on that. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Really pleasure also from my side to be here and to participate. And because it is the first time that from DG Agriculture side I can participate in a European Carbon Farming Summit, I would like to start with the Commission's vision for agriculture and food, because that is the Commission's programmatic document for agriculture and food value chain, and it is now 1 year old. And in that relatively short time of 1 year, we have already delivered action on more than 60% of the initiatives that it announced. And one chapter of that communication where that is particularly clearly the case is entitled Leveraging the Opportunities of Innovation that Rewards. So really emphasis on the word innovation, because farmers are innovators and entrepreneurs by nature. And concrete examples of the EU-level actions over the last years from that part were first the bioeconomy strategy. Kurt already talked about it. This one aims at positioning the EU as a leader in the rapidly expanding bioeconomy market. It's about the commercialization of bio-based and circular solutions, scaling up some breakthrough technologies, bridging investment gaps. This will be particularly beneficial for the farming community by enabling diversification of value streams, valorization also of farm residues, strengthening the role of primary producers in the value chain, and of course then generating new jobs in the rural areas. The second point I wanted to mention there is the carbon farming. Carbon farming is really emerging as an additional source of income. The Carbon Removals and Carbon Farming Regulation, the CRFCF, has created the first EU-wide voluntary framework for certifying carbon removals, carbon farming, carbon storage in products across Europe. And the certification methodologies are being developed, as we have heard, to reliably also monitor, report, and verify the carbon removals. That's about soil emission reductions, biodiversity benefits, and carbon storage. And once this will be fully developed, we see it as a very effective way of matching offer and demand of these voluntary credits, because it's a market that we're talking about. And that will, again, optimize additional income sources and opportunities for farmers. And then going forward, the Commission will complement this work with developing opportunities for nature credits. And a number of existing projects already exist, and we see an important potential there as well. But I could go on, because we have more opportunities also for new income sources for farmers. If you think about the renewable energy production, which is a topic that is gaining urgency again with the crisis in the Middle East. But what these different tools have in common is they're all new opportunities for complementary sources of income for farmers, for a climate neutral and nature positive economy. They all require a trusted framework, which often takes the form of an EU legislation. And thirdly, they all require a demand and supply side take-up, because innovative financing tools, including especially private and blended private-public financing for nature, can, in addition to the classic public support, reward farmers for maintaining or transitioning to nature-positive practices and bring them the longer term together with companies, with investors, and thereby create these new business interests. Because reaching the agreed climate targets will require all these new activities of the economy to contribute, with a central role for agriculture and forestry. And from the Commission side, we recognize that, of course, providing high quality food for Europeans, but not only Europeans, beyond Europe, of course, is the main task of the agricultural sector. And EU agriculture is very successful in that. Last year, we had, from the EU side, an agri-food export surplus, 64 billion. And this is in spite of rising income input prices and goods that we import also rising. But I want to say it very clearly, in the agri-food sector's aspirations to improve and support the climate performance, they are not running counter to the objective of providing food security for the EU. That's the primary purpose of agriculture. But of course, you can achieve multiple objectives at the same time. And by increasing and protecting the EU's carbon sinks, there's really an opportunity here, as was mentioned already, to improve soil fertility and consequentially food production over the long term. Because carbon farming also provides different other ecosystem services and makes farming more resilient and resistant to climate pressures. Now, we are not starting from zero. We have existing policies that already contribute to enhance the capacity of soils, forests to store carbon, to contribute to agriculture and forestry sectors, to also contribute to climate neutrality. And in this context, research and innovation on the ground is a key tool, and we have seen in the introduction quite a lot of sponsoring and contribution to the Carbon Summit, to the events that we enjoy today. The mission soil projects, but also the Credible project, they are dedicated to soil carbon farming. They are in particular looking into the living labs concept. We bring together farmers, foresters, researchers to test carbon farming methodologies, climate neutral management practices on real farms, on real labs. That's the place to go, really the direction where we can really bring together this innovation and the application on the ground. And now through the Common Agricultural Policy, we are providing incentives to farmers to shift towards more climate-friendly farming practices, either through basic conditions and requirements for support payments, or then through eco-schemes and agro-environmental measures, as well as through investments. Because there is a role for money and for public money, clearly. Thanks to the CAP subsidies, significant progress has already been achieved regarding protection and improvement of soil quality. We think that about 50% and 35% of the EU agricultural area are now covered by relevant agri-environmental practices under these different schemes, soil and biomass. And also an analysis of the existing Common Agricultural Policy strategic plans of the member states indicates a potential positive contribution to enhance carbon sequestration by around 30 million tons a year across the EU. In other words, providing incentives does deliver results. And this is something we must maintain, and this is something that we want to strengthen also in our proposal for the future CAP for the period after 2028, incentives more than obligations for farmers as entrepreneurs to go in that direction and do more than the minimum required for soil quality, for biomass, for nature-positive actions. And we see clearly a need for continued support, as these efforts are expensive and complex, and today are not priced into the products that farmers sell. And in this regard, the carbon removal and carbon farming certification framework is the first step to allow the development and potential of new revenues for farmers, forest holders, for storing carbon in soils, in trees, in grasslands, in wetlands, in peatlands, recognizing their role as managers of the land. And we need to make sure that this approach to carbon farming is simple, that it is attractive for farmers, that it is easy for them to use when delivering these high-quality carbon removals. The upcoming revision of the CRFC framework this year will be an opportunity not to miss, because we hear about administrative burden, we hear about costs for farmers and forest holders. These should be kept minimal. We have technology to rely on to do this. We need to avoid excessive data gathering and reporting requirements, because they may overwhelm the farmers. And second, I also want to say that the Common Agricultural Policy measures and the CRFC must work together. Many practices eligible under carbon farming today are already covered by the CAP interventions, and farmers who have effectively been carbon farming for a while must also see the benefit. The third point is really about a stable and clear market framework with attractive prices for the carbon farming credits to ensure a viability over several years. Because this is a process that takes several years, that is a risk and an investment, a commitment over several years. And what farmers and forest holders need is a secure and predictable revenue stream. And that's why the current work on the potential CRFC and the discussions today around the Buyers Club could really help stimulate demand for carbon farming and provide a much needed boost to the market. And with that, I very much look forward to our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elisabeth. It was really nice again. I'm a little bit afraid that we will not have too much time anymore to discuss with them. We will just need to bring that to a different place in this podium. Our third panelist is Massimiliano Ginsanti. He is a very interesting, has a very interesting bio. He is not only the president of Confagricoltura, so the General Confederation of Italian Agriculture, but also is the president of COPA, which stands for Committee of Professional Agricultural Organizations of the European Union. And he is also the CEO of a company called Agricola Giansanti, of the Di Munzo Agricultural Group, which specializes in the production of cereals, kiwis, milk, and livestock products. But then he's also active in agro-industrial and agro-energy sectors. And on top of that, he also produces Parmigiano Reggiano cheese in Parma and high-quality cow's milk for the Centro di Latte di Roma. So I'm very much looking forward to your view on carbon farming and how we can use that. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, and a warm welcome from all the Italian farmers here in Padova, because for the Italians one is Padova city, so it's a real great pleasure for staying with you, with us. It's a great honor, because the discussion now about our future like farmers is not easy. Also often the words of that I listen on Ms. Werner, on Ms. Vandenberger, but also about Kirsten. It's not easy now to find good words, good solution for farmers. But as you know, we are living a very special moment, a lot of challenges in front of us. The wars that are on the border of Europe is not easy for us. We are a lot of problems inside of our farms about our present and future. It's not easy to find solution for farmers. Our income is under pressure. Our life is under pressure. How to be more productive on the market, in the global market, when day by day you see on what happened about the fertilizer cost, energy cost, and so on, and also about is it possible to find in this moment, as example, nitrogen on the market for your farm? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. But are you ready to pay? Yes, but it's not enough. So there is a lot of challenges, and meanwhile we are discussing on food security. Who is in this moment that is still discussing on food safety, or which is the impact of the farmers on the green transitions? I don't know if in this moment there is a very strong and deep discussion about it, but we are living also in the period where the effects of the climate change is very tough for farmers. If you see what happened in the recently period in Europe, we passed from heavy rain or long period of drought. So how is it possible to be a farmer in that case? So it's not easy, but let's see what we can do for anyone. So about the carbon farming. So the carbon farming is often presented as a key solution for achieving our climate objectives. And indeed, it offers a real opportunity to recognize the essential role that farmers play in managing land and contributing to climate mitigation. We, like farmers, we manage 60% and more of the land in Europe between arable land and forestry, and through the practices, and we enhance soil carbon, we improve landscape management, and we promote sustainable land use, and we can deliver meaningful climate benefits while also strengthening the resilience of our farms. But let me be very clear. Certification alone does not create a market. From a farmer's perspective, the fundamental question is simple. Will there be a stable and credible demand for carbon credits? Without clear demand signals and predictable prices, investing in new practice remains a risk. At the same time, farmers are already operating under significant economic pressure. Climate policies must not simply shift additional costs and risk onto them. If farmers are expected to reduce emissions, particularly Scope 3 emissions, then these efforts must be fairly remunerated. Climate ambition across the food chain must be built on shared responsibility, not on a cost transfer. This is where partnerships become crucial. Well-designed partnerships between farmers and the industry can play an important role, but they must respect farmers' autonomy, ensure fair contracts, and provide a balanced sharing of both investment and risk. We also know that the cooperation works. Cooperative models have long demonstrated their value in agriculture. They can reduce transaction costs, organize certification, and strengthen farmers' bargaining power. They can also help aggregate projects and facilitate dialogue between farmers and buyers, ensuring that farmers remain active farmers, not passive suppliers. Another key issue is the credibility. High-quality carbon credits require robust monitoring and verification. Environmental integrity is essential. Without it, carbon markets simply will not function. But we must also ensure that the system remains workable for farmers. Today, the accumulation of requirements, and certainly deduction, baseline adjustments, long monitoring periods, risk reduction, the number of tradable credits while increasing cost. We need a more balanced approach. Digital tools, modeling, and remote sensing can help reduce complexity while maintaining scientific robustness. Group certification can also make participation more accessible. At the same time, farmers and investors need clarity and stability. Without a predictable framework, there will be no long-term engagement. Finally, we should not forget that carbon farming is not just about carbon. Many of these practices also improve soil health, increase water retention, enhance biodiversity, and strengthen resilience to drought and floods. In other words, they contribute not only to the mitigation, but also to adaptation and long-term productivity. This is exactly the kind of integrated approach that we need. We already have many successful pilot projects across Europe. The challenge now is scaling up. And here, 3 barriers remain clear. First, uncertain demand. Second one, administrative complexity. And third, high monitoring costing. If we want carbon farming to move from pilot project to a functioning market, we must address these issues decisively. Let me conclude. Carbon farming has real potential, but only if we get the framework right. We need a reliable market, fair distribution of costs and risk, workable certification system, and strong partnership. If we succeed, carbon farming can become a cornerstone of our climate strategy, while ensuring that farmers are not just participants, but the key partners in the transition. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I prepared a lot of questions, but I think that already a lot of questions are being posed by our panelists themselves. So I'm thinking about a new strategy of my panel that will be quite short. Anyway, our last speaker or panelist and speaker of this plenary session is Remy Roca. He is the Global Vice President of Sustainability for Royal Canin at Mars since January last year. And before that, he held a senior leadership role at McDonald's, both in France and in the United States. He also served as a senior director of impact, overseeing corporate communications, public affairs, ESG, and philanthropy. And during his work, he led transformative programs, including the establishment of a global regenerative agriculture platform and significant advancements in carbon emission reductions. So please, Remy, have the floor.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for organizing this critical, important summit, and thank you also for hosting us in this very nice city, Padova. So, Mars is a family-owned company which is known for its snack brands like M&M, Snickers, Mars, but also some of famous pet food brands like Royal Canin or Pedigree. We have in Europe, so we are a global company, but in Europe we have 24 factories which are importing, obviously, our food from EU agriculture and exporting to 100 countries around the world. Being a family-owned company, we are thinking in generation, which means that sustainability for us is key, and we are definitely have a long-term commitments. And there is one thing on which we are especially intentional is climate. And we are intentional on climate for 2 reasons. The first one is that we believe in science. We believe in the, impressive presentation we saw this morning about what is happening around the world, and therefore we need to fight against climate change. And that's why, aligned with Paris Agreement, we made, we have a journey to net zero, SBTi compliance, and by 2030 we target to reduce our emission by 50% versus 2015. To achieve that, 65% of our footprint is in agriculture, and that therefore it's key to develop what we call, climate smart agriculture or regenerative agriculture. That was the first reason. The second reason is because of resiliency of our supply chain. And when I say resiliency of the supply chain, is also resiliency of the farmers we are working with. Again, mentioning the fact that our 24 factories in Europe are sourcing from EU agriculture, and therefore the resiliency of EU agriculture is key for Mars. But where are we today? So in June 23, we made the commitment to invest 1 billion, so 1 billion globally between 2023 and 2026 in climate. And a big portion of that is spent investing in agriculture in Europe. We are now beyond the pilot phase. So for example, at Royal Canin, more than 45% of the cereals we purchased in Europe is produced under regenerative agriculture practices or climate smart practices. And we have also great programs on dairy across Europe in Germany, Poland, Ireland, or Netherlands. But again, we cannot, and it has been said today, we cannot solve that alone on our own. It needs to be a collective effort between the private sectors, but also collective efforts with the EU Commission. And that's why we are here today, because again, policies can be the accelerator to unlock the acceleration. Thank you very much, and looking forward also for the panel. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, so thank you too for this. I'm really pleased to hear that there are so many from different directions, from DG Agri, DG Clima, from the farmers' organizations, and from corporate. These initiatives that all seem to go into to converge into where we need to go, and I'm really proud that our summit here can be a bit of help on generating that synergy and making these steps, maybe transformative steps to be possible. I had also shared with you a lot of questions, but somehow time ran faster than I thought. So then, when I listened to all of you, because also much of what I was going to ask you, you already said in your introductions, basically boils down to me to upscaling. Like, I'm really pleased to hear your story that you already are using a lot of regeneratively grown crops in your product. However, when I bike around the Netherlands or in Spain, in places where I am a lot, I still see a lot of land that is not managed in a sustainable way. So there are really good pilots. There's also like the living labs that are being funded under the Mission Soil, are also really good examples of the way to go ahead. But still, it seems to me that this next level up, the upscaling of what we need to do. So that is basically what I would like you to challenge you to talk a little bit. Like, maybe you could have a question for either Kurt or Elisabeth, and vice versa. So what it is that you would like to see? What is it that you would like to ask them how they see that?
Yeah, thank you for that. Yes, I said that we reached some certain scale on grains, but it's true that on other supply chain like livestock farming, it's definitely complex. We are at Mars only a small client, and so therefore we need to have this collective effort, this collective drive with other private sectors, and definitely the support from public funding would help to again reduce the price, reduce the investment, and enable us to not only accelerate but also scale. So how do you see that? How could it work to have this public funding available in the coming years?
Thank you very much for the question. Well, for me, indeed, there was a lot of focus on soil, but it is, of course, also true for livestock farming. Yeah? The same logic applies, that you need to think in sustainability cycles and in long-term benefits, and actually, the circularity aspects hold there in the same way. For me, the main point is about the incentives, and we have really seen that the incentives, and I mean economic incentives and the logic in terms of farms' investments is what is the element to make a difference, because farmers' incomes are squeezed, but we see that they pick up good practices if they see a long-term benefit in that, if it makes economic sense for them. And then logically, you need a certain scale for a market to emerge and for this collaboration across the supply chain to be done not by a few companies but by substantial number. And so there is for sure a role in the design of the system, and there is for sure a role also in bit of money to bring that security, that investments that are required today will bring the benefit in a number of years or over the course of a number of years. And I think this is a bit the logic of de-risking where we could come in also with a buyer's club.
I'll add a few words from a DG Klima and climate perspective. To reach our goals for climate neutrality 2050 and climate resilience, we need carbon removals. There's no doubt about this. So we need it for our climate goals, but carbon removals and carbon sequestration also has a strong environmental, ecological value for our nature, but also for farmers and foresters. So the case is very clear, I think. We need to find a system where it makes economic and ecological sense for all the operators in the value chain. Because there will be no green transition with red numbers. But if we don't do the green transition, there will be red numbers. So we're in this together, very much. So I fully agree with Elizabeth that we need to look at what are the incentives for those working on the land, in the forests, and then all the way through the value chain, looking at the economic incentives, but also what society is willing to pay for this. And at the end of the day, if we come in with public support, which personally I think we should do, there must be a value to society that we can demonstrate and make very concrete. Now, we are seeing that this value of increased resilience, as you said, Remy, has a value. It is an externality that some companies are already seeing and willing to pay for, but you are in a minority, I think. So what we need to do is to make this clear to more actors in the whole value chain and then scale this up. And this is where the Buyers Club comes in. We need to design this now. We are starting to prepare the implementation of the next multi-annual financial framework, which will kick in if member states and parliament agree on it by early 28. But we're already starting on this now. So this is really the moment to define a strong concept and look at how we can make this actionable, so that we in the Commission, and we will be working on this with colleagues in DG Agri and many other DGs, that we have a convincing story to tell, that this can be a very good case for an innovative approach in the next multi-annual financial framework. The other thing I quickly want to allude to is that at the end of this year, we will be proposing a revision of our climate policy framework for after 2030, including a new approach through targets that we have for land use change, forestry, national targets, the role of agriculture and all that. So the more we see that there is a potential in such a buyer's club and using carbon farming as a catalyst for growing this bioeconomy, the more we can embed this in our vision for the next decade, so that it is not becoming just a one-off experiment, but that we really have a 15-year perspective to making this grow.
Thank you so much. I would like to ask Massimiliano to give your view on how this could be, if it's feasible to do all of this that is proposed by policies, and what are the main barriers, as you see, that to actually get this done on the ground?
So, thank you. It's not easy because, as you know, in this moment, there is a lot of discussion also inside of the farmers community about the standards that we're using inside of Europe. We we are discussing about the international trade, and this is one of the issues that we may discuss in the future about the standards. So how to be comparable the European standards to other standards. Meanwhile, we are going in a green transition, and in other places of the world, they are stand alone, waiting and see on what happens on the market. So we are investing. I like what Ms. Bernard says. So we have to incentivize the farming. Yes, it's totally different that will be supported with subsidies. So yes, we have to give to the farmers the good incentives to go on that direction, but in a global market, how is it possible to be competitive without the same standards? So I have to guarantee, like the president of the European farmers, to give to the European farmers the right tools to be competitive on the market. And I believe the green transition could be also a good instrument to defend our area in Europe. So it's very important now to push up on high standards, but we are to be very stable also on the position at the end. Because if we'll have some different pathway on our route, it's very different than to say to the farmers why we are moving on the route that we give to them. So we have to build a very strong collaboration between farmers, industries, and institutions. We have to create all the issues that we need to give to the farmers the real measures on what we are doing. And the technologies now, it's different than some years ago. And then we have to move to create the real market, because I saw on my side 4 years ago in Australia, they tried to move to the carbon farming with different measures, but later than 4 years, nothing happened. So, and a lot of farmers, they are come back to stop it, and they come back to the, so now we have to give to we have to keep the decision, and we have to go very fast in the forward. The last things. But we can't use the money of the CAP for that. I want to be very clear.
Yes. Can I also add that indeed, I think it was actually shown quite nicely already in our keynote that you need a stacking of finance. And the CAP money logic is a different one. Is an income support logic, is a basic requirement logic. What would be different about the carbon farming, and therefore additional, is that you bring in the private money and that you make sure there is not only a minimum requirement, but an active carbon farming with, as an accounting unit, the tons of CO2 saved. So that's a very different logic, and this is also why I wanted to underline in my opening that you need to have this complementarity built into the system, not the competition, the complementarity.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, unfortunately, I really would have loved to talk another half hour on the stage here with you, because I think that you all have so much interesting things to tell, and I actually have a bunch of questions for all of you, but unfortunately, we don't have this time. So I would actually like to challenge each one of you to just give me just one priority action that you think we should focus on within this summit. Some of the recommendations that you hope that will come out of the work that we are going to do here in the remainder of our 3 days. Maybe I can start with you.
Perfect. Thanks for that. So. Yeah, maybe two. The first one is the one I mentioned, is about how the public funding can support private funding, and therefore create this acceleration that we need to not only have pioneers, but also a collective effort from public and private together. The second one is around simplicity, harmonization of carbon accountability, and also MRV, to make sure that it is aligned with GHG protocol, SBTi, to make sure that when the private sector is going to invest, it's going to be aligned with the rest of the world. So simplification, harmonization, and support with public funding. Thank you.
Very fast. We have to pass from words to fact. That's it.
Okay, excellent.
And we have to look at the demand and the supply side, because I see here it's really about the demand that will guarantee that the supply comes steadily on stream.
And I agree. I think this summit should really look at the demand. I would love to see a concept for a buyers club coming out of this summit, or shortly after this summit, a kind of prototype of what the buyers club would be, who would be in it, what would the participants buy, and for what purpose, that we have a good understanding for that, but that we also embed it in a more systemic approach, because a lot will be necessary beyond the buyers club to pull this off. The MRV was mentioned, all the remote sensing innovations, etc., etc. So it's part of a system approach that we need, but if we can have a concept for such a buyers club, I think that would be a very successful carbon summit.
Okay, thank you so much for that challenge. And with that, I would like to end our panel, but stay put before the coffee break, because I still have a couple of logistical messages for you. So, but thank you. Okay. Can you go back to my slides? Control room. Hello? Okay, next one, no, next one. Okay, I can do it myself. Okay, so wait, let me just go to the previous one. So this is the program of today. So after this, we have the coffee break, which is actually, it's very important to know that there is coffee just straight outside of this room, but there's also further down in the building a couple of other places where you can get your coffee. Then we have our parallel sessions, after that lunch, and the second plenary session after that. And then after that, we don't have a coffee break, but we just go straight to the second parallel session. Just with you can have 15 minutes to change from one room to the other. And then we have our poster session and networking session. So we have in total, apart from this lovely room, in which we will also have a parallel session, we have a set of another 8 rooms that are well signed throughout the building that you can find them. So here you have a floor. So we are currently here in the Giotto room. Is my mouse also there? Actually, yeah, it is. Then here, this is the place where we have, where you came in. Here's the entrance with the reception. Then here in this part here, the yellow part, there is the catering. And also here in the bistro, there's catering. There are 5 rooms here that are all in the same floor, so on the ground floor. And then when you go one stair up, we have another catering area over here. And when you go up the stairs, that is just next to the reception, you go to the Galileo room. The posters are all in this area where there is the blue rectangle. And then we have one floor more up, we have the 2 Mantenga, I'm not sure, I'm very difficult this word, rooms where you can also go to one of the parallel sessions. So one thing that you might not have seen yet, we also have 3 Wi-Fi networks. They are just 3 streams so that we could accommodate for all the people that are here. The password is the same for each one of them. And if one of them is overloaded, you can just try one of the other ones. So these are the parallel sessions that we have in store for you. They have different color coding, which represent the different themes that we have in the summit. So here you can, well, I don't know where that went. Anyway, so this is what we, after the short coffee break that we have, you can choose one of the parallel sessions of your choice, and then we will start there at 11:30. So now, please enjoy your coffee break, say hello to your old friends, and make some new ones. Thank you.